This cute little shorebird is sadly threatened with extinction, especially in the Great Lakes region, where it's critically endangered. And segments of beaches may be closed when they're nesting. But why? On this episode of Animal Analysis, Charadrius melodus, the piping plover. It's May on this peninsula in southern Ontario. This is Presqu'ile Provincial Park in the Northumberland region, which juts out into Lake Ontario, an important stopover for migrating birds. On the beach, a single dunlin rests on his journey to the Arctic. Nearby, a willet runs down the beach. He's a bit off course. And a black-bellied plover takes a rest by the waves. Another tiny plover calls out. He's a piping plover, and this male is looking for a mate. His name is Poppi Seed. He hatched in 2023 to his parents, Hawkeye and Arwen, in New York. It's his first time here in Presqu'ile, after having not mated in 2024, so he's looking to impress. Nearby, a female watches warily. This is Sesame. She hatched in 2024 from Point Aux Chenes in Michigan, and she arrived here in Ontario just a few days after Poppi, and has been watching him. Just yesterday, May 19th, Sesame finally accepted Poppi's advances, after his various in-flight displays, pebble tossing, scraping. Now, these two piping plovers are preparing their nest and guarding their territory, hoping to successfully raise a fledgling for the first time in their short lives. So wait a minute. How do we know these birds' names and history? Well, see those bands on their legs? They aren't just fancy bird jewelry. Each fledgling is banded at roughly 8 to 10 days old. These bands serve as unique identifiers for each individual, and are tracked through surveys and reports from the general public. This arrangement is necessary, as the Great Lakes piping plover population is critically endangered, with only an estimated 85 pairs throughout the region in 2025. And that's actually quite high in comparison to previous years, though many of these would not even be successful. Piping plovers have three main breeding populations: across the Great Plains, along the Atlantic coast, and the smallest throughout the Great Lakes region. Come autumn, these birds migrate down to the southern U.S. coast, where they winter until migrating back up north to their breeding grounds in April and May, as seen on this map. For a long time, especially over the last 50 years, piping plover populations have been declining, primarily due to human disturbance and habitat loss due to land use changes, and had even become extirpated from many of their prior breeding grounds, such as Ontario. However, conservation work such as habitat protections and closing sanctioned beach sections when plovers are nesting, as well as monitoring and captive rearing of abandoned eggs, has seen a slight upturn in their populations, especially in the Great Lakes, where they have recolonized some of the regions they once disappeared from. This is the case in Ontario, where piping plovers returned to breed in 2007 after a roughly 30-year absence. One specific area was Saga Beach, on the north shores of southern Ontario, of Georgian Bay, has produced over half of the province's piping plover fledglings since 2007. Overall, the global piping plover population is estimated to be roughly 8,000, with only 85 pairs making up the Great Lakes population. A small number indeed. So how can you identify if a bird is a piping plover, or a similar species? Well, plovers are small, round shorebirds with short, stubby bills and generally solid color plumages, unlike sandpipers, which have longer bills and legs with more mottled plumage, such as this Barrett's sandpiper. Now, in comparison to other small plovers, piping plovers are lighter with sandy-colored backs, with adults having a black neck and forehead pattern during the breeding season, as seen on Poppi here. Piping plovers also have orange and black bills, with bright orange legs. The most common similar species over most of the piping plover's range is Charadrius semipalmatus, the semi-palmated plover, which is much darker overall, having a black mask during the breeding season, though they do lose that in the non-breeding season. Semi-palmated are still darker overall. On the South Atlantic coast of the US, they also overlap with the Wilson's plover, but Wilsons have a much larger bill and don't have orange legs. The most similar species would be the snowy plover, which has a limited range overlap, but they are lighter colored with less of a dark breast band, a thinner bill, and snowy plovers also have dark legs, not orange ones like piping plovers. Other plovers, such as the killdeer, are larger, and sandpipers like the sanderling have longer beaks and legs. Piping plovers nest and forage on beaches, primarily sandy beaches with sparse vegetation. However, this can cause conflicts with humans who want to visit these same beaches. So a small compromise is made. Small segments of beaches are roped off and closed to the public to protect these birds. In addition, off-leash dogs and ATV riding on these beaches are often also restricted to protect these precious animals. However, some sadly don't see it that way, and an anti-plover movement has propped up in some places, with Facebook groups and bumper stickers supporting the murder of plovers or ignoring the rules. There have even been cases of nests trampled and rules ignored, whether trespassing, disturbing, or purposefully destroying eggs of plovers or other nesting shorebirds like oyster catchers. It's honestly disgusting how anyone would support killing such an adorable, endangered animal, just because there's a slight inconvenience in a small percentage of local beaches. Luckily, we have provincial or state parks dedicated to preserving nest sites and observing with plover guardians, volunteers, and scientists who observe, defend, and educate about these birds. And many of these areas are in government-owned protected parks, so there's no risk of development whatsoever. Hold on, let me get that real quick. Hello? Yes. Huh? What? Well, what about the plovers? They can't do that, though, right? Come on, it's gotta be illegal or something. But taxpayers are the ones funding it. Well, that's just bloody stupid! So it seems provincial parks aren't at no risk of development. The Ontario government has proposed multiple bills, such as Bill 5, which would weaken habitat protections for threatened species, and amendments to the Provincial Parks and Conservation Reserves Act 2006, which would allow for the sale of provincial park land. Specifically, the sale of large segments of Wasaga Beach to the town to, quote, support the town's overall strategy for increased tourism and investment, unquote. In addition to selling Crown land and the removal of all of beach areas 1, 2, New Wasaga, and Allenwood Beach to revitalize the downtown area. Basically, they want to sell it for development. This is devastating news for Ontario piping plovers, as 54 of the 57 piping plover nests in Wasaga since 2008 fall within these boundaries, as shared by Ontario Plovers on Instagram, linked below. If the land transfer goes through with no clause for protecting piping plover habitat, it could spell the end of Wasaga's time as the best piping plover habitat in Ontario, and could lead to the re-extirpation of these charismatic birds from Ontario, as well as set a precedent for the loss of protections for other provincial parks. What park could be next? Pinery? Presqu'ile? Algonquin? It's a slippery slope. Anyways, let's check back in on Poppi and Sesame in Presqu'ile. Ah, look at that. Sesame is chilling safely in the roped area, keeping an eye out for predators, while Poppi is closer to the shore, feeding for small invertebrates, the primary food source for piping plovers, throughout the algae and other beach debris. But foraging leaves plovers vulnerable, as they're focused on their prey. A merlin, a small falcon, and a predator of birds. And a piping plover sure would make a decent meal for him. But not today. This merlin has already eaten, and just needs to take a bath now. Staying clean is vital for birds, to fend off parasites, and preening is essential to keep flight feathers in good condition. This is true for both the merlin, as well as Poppi and Sesame, who are now busy incubating their clutch of eggs. Piping plover nests are built from a scrape in the sand and are often lined with pebbles or shells. On average, a clutch contains 4 small sandy-colored speckled eggs, which both the male and female incubate by taking turns. This incubation period lasts roughly 26 days and leaves the parents vulnerable. But let's hope Poppi and Sesame have what it takes. Plovers are quite unique in terms of birds, which makes sense as there's over 10,500 species, the majority of which are passerine songbirds, which plovers are not. So then, where do piping plovers fit into the bird family? Well, as birds, plovers fall into the class Aves, the birds, which are actually dinosaurs, and therefore fall within the class Reptilia. But the Aves are split into 2 major clades, the Paleognathae, which contains the ratites, like ostriches and whatnot, and the Neognathae, which contains all the other birds, including plovers. The Neognathae is then split into 2 clades, the Galloanzirae, which are ducks, chickens, and their relatives, and the Neoaves, which contains everything else, including plovers. Within the Neoaves, plovers belong to the order Charadriformes, which is most likely sister to the Gruiformes, but the various order placements in the Neoaves are often debated, due to the rapid diversification that followed the KT mass extinction, when non-avian dinosaurs disappeared 66 million years ago, so they all split at a similar time to fill all the empty niches. Within the Charadriformes, plovers belong to the Charadri, which is basal to the gulls, terns, and auks of Lori, and the sandpipers of Scalapi. Within Charadri, the plovers of Charadridae fall sister to a clade containing the avocets, stilts, ibisbil, and oystercatchers. The relationships of the various genera of plovers is complex, with many monotypic genera, but it appears the genus Charadrius, which contains the piping plover, falls sister to the thin ornis plovers, which would likely be your first guess just by looking at the group's members, though this genus is restricted to the Old World. The genus Charadrius contains 4 species, and as expected from appearance, the piping plover, Charadrius melodus, is most closely related to the semi-palmated plover, Charadrius semipalmatus, with that clade falling sister to the common ringed plover, Charadrius hyaticula, which is basically the Old World equivalent to the semi-palmated. And the larger killdeer, Charadrius vociferus, is the basal species. Let's see how Poppi and Sesame's incubation is going. Wait, where are they? Both birds have disappeared. On June 16th, Poppi went missing, and midway through incubation means he likely fell prey to some predator, with a high likelihood it was that resident merlin. Though other predators of piping plovers include cats and dogs, minks and other ermines, foxes, crows, owls, and gulls. Sesame tried to continue incubation, but unfortunately with no success. Plover incubation is a 2-bird job, it seems. She abandoned the nest and actually showed up in New York, on the beach Poppy Seed was born, and hung around with Poppy's dad, Hawkeye, for a few days before continuing south to her wintering grounds. Almost as if she went to tell Hawkeye about Poppy's passing. Nevertheless, Poppy Seed will be missed. However, another pair of piping plovers also settled into Presqu'ile in 2025. Saga, a male from Wasaga Beach, and Lola successfully nested with 1 young fledgling. The baby piping plovers are like tiny cotton balls with legs, and are so adorable running around the beach exploring their new world. Piping plovers sure are incredible animals. But how can you help to protect them? Well, the most important thing is to obey signage and look out for plovers when you visit the beach. Make sure not to disturb them, or let your pets be where they aren't supposed to be. You can also report piping plover sightings to your local bird groups. For Canada, we have Birds Canada. You can also contact your local MPs and voice your concerns about bills that impact critical habitats, such as Bill 5 in Ontario. And I think the states have a similar bill proposed recently. And if you see someone curious about plovers or breaking the rules near plover sites, calmly educate them. Maybe give them a link to this video, or your local plover monitoring group. Or just tell them about these amazing birds yourself. And most of all, continue to learn more about piping plovers and all the other interesting life we can and do share the world with. Until next time on Animal Analysis, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment on your favorite encounter with these birds. And maybe check out one of these other videos.